Welcome back, everyone. We have reached the keynote speaker portion of the event. The incredible Meghan Chayka is here. I'll give you a bit of an introduction to Meghan. She's the co-founder, co-CEO of Stathletes, a hockey data and analytics company providing industry-leading hockey insights to over 22 leagues worldwide, including some of the highest professional levels across North America and Europe. Meghan's also a data scientist in residence at the University of Toronto. She's been named one of the Hockey News top 100 people of power and influence, one of Sportsnet's most important women in hockey. That's just really a couple of her many accolades. Just want to give you guys another reminder to submit a question to the Q&A box if you have one. Another reminder that you will be emailed out that survey at the end of the event, and to fill it out to be entered to win one of 3 pairs of Under Armour shoes. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Meghan.
Thank you very much for the kind intro. Can you hear me okay on your end? I've been struggling with audio. I was even on Skype this morning, which I haven't used since I was in university. So it's crazy what's happening during the pandemic in terms of, connecting with each other. But I just wanted to say that was a super awesome panel. I wish I was here even earlier. I learned a lot. And I think one of the great things, even from Tara, was talking about, harassment. And I always think, especially being a woman in sport, you really have to think of don't take criticism from people you won't take advice from, and have a pretty thick skin, because certainly can get it challenging from time to time. So I wanted to have a presentation that was a bit all-encompassing. I know there's a wide variety of people on here. I struggled a little bit with how hockey heavy to be versus tech and education. So I'm going to give you a little bit of taste of everything that I would typically do just one keynote on. I've kind of mashed it all together. With that said, I think there is a running chat. So if people do have feedback, because I will be jumping around, please feel free to drop it in there. I'll keep it open. And I know SJ is going to come in with some questions at the end as well. So if it's general, it's fine to save it. If it's on something specific that I'm talking about, please put it in the chat. It'd be nice to have this be a little bit more interactive instead of just me talking into the void of Zoom. So without further ado, as SJ said, I co-founded a hockey analytics company, but my path definitely hasn't been that straight. So, working in hockey was something that was like a huge blessing, but wasn't something that I had set out to do. So I'll give you a bit of my background and overview on what I did, how I got here, why I'm talking to you now. Also talk about other applications of what I do. So we even jumped in and did a COVID project with Toronto Public Health. We'll give you some data and analytics examples in hockey. So for all of the hockey nuts in the room, I'm sure most of you are, we can go through that and have a bit of fun. And then I'm also going to touch on something that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and that's some of the research on women in business, women in tech, and how we can apply that to women in sports and hockey, and hopefully some key takeaways that you can take, whether you're a man or a woman, listening to this presentation. There's something for everyone. So to start, we started actually over 12, 13 years ago, building data applications. Before that, we were even just doing video, doing basic tagging, everything that you would think that a video coach would do, we were kind of doing, about 15 years ago. So I had a VC even call me last week and said, oh yeah, you're another one of those overnight success that took about a decade to build. So very typical in tech that people think, you go from 0 to $10 million in revenue, when really it takes quite a while to get the first million, and then it starts coming a lot faster. From there, it took us about a year or two after incorporation to get major NHL clients on board. We had quite a big shift about half a decade ago. One of our co-founders became the first NHL president, GM, the youngest one. And, so we really looked more to scale and more to different markets at that point as well, and became more of a tech-focused, software-heavy company. As well, we were doing some, real-time IHF tournaments, so started expanding internationally about 6-7 years ago. That's really fun for me. I like, being in other countries and understanding international business. And I think that's one thing that people minimize a bit with hockey. You know, when you look at the four major sports, I talk to a lot of, especially baseball, basketball people, and, you know, very centric on the US. Maybe baseball, you'll get some Mexico, Japan. Obviously basketball, there's some like Spain, some European countries, but just not the footprint that hockey has. Hockey is really in a lot of countries, especially when you talk about Europe and Russia. There's major companies that hockey's their number one sport. So it's a really interesting sport to work in because of that outreach. As well, we opened our third office in 2018, and actually we just opened our fourth office this year. So even though it's a pandemic, it is, you know, interesting to see that some spaces and markets are actually very important. And part of that is not only, you know, the scalability of tech and just how important software is and important it is moving forward to have better information, but also how easy it is and efficient it is for wherever you are in the world. So like I said, we can work with clients on all sorts of, you know, areas and places, straight from leagues to teams to players, agents, digital media, and, you know, even gambling, gaming, especially is very on the up and coming, both in the US and in Canada, as they start passing more and more legislations. You can see as well, hockey, not always, you know, the usual people on this cover. I was lucky enough to be on the Hockey News 2 years ago, Power and Influence cover. I was actually stuck in Europe in a tournament, and they called me and they said, you need a picture in a black suit. And I was actually pregnant at the time. And I was like, I don't even know if I'll fit into anything. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I couldn't obviously turn down the opportunity. And there's a pregnant woman on the Hockey News. I've never told people that, but I think it's worth saying that, you know, women go through a lot more than some people think as well to make their careers happen. So what did not work for me? I think that's even more important to talk about what did work for me, because I have so many students, even young students at this point, reach out to me saying, how can I have, you know, a similar career to you? Or I want to work in hockey. How did you do it? Well, what didn't work for me was when I was in high school, I graduated as a number one student. And I thought that, you know, I should be a doctor. I should be a surgeon. That was like a really good career path for someone with really high marks. I always did well in math and science. And I really pursued that heavily until probably the end of my second year, when I did a job shadowing experience a few nights in the ER. And I realized I didn't like blood that much, which is not a great thing if you want to be a doctor. And I was okay with needles, not my favorite though. So, you know, I put a lot of time and effort into like a construct that I had of what a successful person should be. From there too, I had a very interesting pivot, and I was actually doing a second degree in finance. I already had one undergrad, and I went in a very specialized program, basically to be an investment banker. And of course, I was graduating in 2008. So anyone that has a bit of years on them will remember that 2008 was the worst financial collapse with the real estate market collapse. And there was no money, no jobs, nothing in terms of finance. And actually some of the biggest banks that were like 100-year-old banks had went bankrupt and let go of everyone. So probably the worst year ever to graduate in finance, and that was me. So had it not been, I probably wouldn't be in hockey right now. I'd be sitting in New York and maybe probably not having as much fun. But it was a really good lesson for me. And I think it's a good lesson to tell people who are graduating this year or looking for careers or have been let go, is that it does get better. There are other options, and sometimes those diversions, you know, you can take with a lot of stride. With that said as well, in 2008, some of the biggest tech companies were founded. So the Ubers, the Airbnbs actually came out of those years, which, you know, you think is kind of counterintuitive. But when you think people have time and resources and they can be creative, you know, they don't have a job or something to go back to, they have to make things up as they go. So I would, you know, say to anyone on this call, if there is an element or something that you want to chase and you do have the time right now, take that energy and put it into something you're passionate about. So that's what did work for me. And that's what I also like to tell people very often. I actually stole this Audit Your Hobbies from an Ivy professor. It was actually a book that he wrote about when he was like very close to death and like really thinking about life. But it was essentially that a lot of people, like I did, think they want to be something just because either their parents want them to be, or they feel like that's a great job, instead of really thinking about how they allocate their time, what they're really interested in. So what I mean by this is, in the next week, go home and see what you do on your spare time. What do you read? What do you consume? What do you talk about? What do you interact about? For me, it was about 90% sports. Anytime I was away from school, studying, whatever, I watched sports. I talked about sports. I watched Sports Center. I, went to games. I played sports. And that was sort of a flag to me that maybe that was something that I could combine with, my background and my education into a career. As well, I hear from a lot of people, I probably get 1 or 2 calls a week of, I want to be in analytics, but I don't really have a background, any sort of technical background. And so my feedback is why. If you haven't pursued any element of having that career, what is a draw? And usually it's like, I think there'd be a good job for me now. It seems like they're paying well. It seems like there's a lot more jobs. And with that said, you don't necessarily need a formal education. In many cases, in many big tech companies, some of the best developers have arts degrees or come from elsewhere, and are very creative, but have also self-taught what they needed to do to be at the forefront of their field. So whether you get a formal education or informal education, probably informal even takes longer in some ways. I think it's necessary to be passionate and really immerse yourself in whatever you're doing. Also, searching for mentors. At this point too, I'm searching for mentees, ways to give back. I have some great ones that I really get as much energy as I hope they get from me. And I think I heard in the other panel too about having, men that are able to sponsor women or push women for promotions. I think that's incredibly important. When you look around the NHL or the CHL or any of these major leagues, who's hiring, who has the money, who has the capital? In many cases, if not all cases, in most teams, it isn't a woman. And that, is a huge hurdle. Because as we know, there's a lot of networking that goes on in sports. There's a lot of, oh, can you help out this person? Or I know this guy who just graduated from law school, or this guy that just stopped his career. It typically isn't necessarily a woman in the mix. So that's certainly, a way of, when you do find a mentor, if you can have an informal mentorship, asking your mentor, is it possible to put my name forward for more jobs? Or I'm very interested in getting a bit of scouting experience. Can you help me, even if it's outside this current team or this current role? As well, I will always say, learn from every person. As, I feel like sometimes that when you climb a ladder, you don't look down as much in terms of what you can learn from others. And I think in many cases, the people in arenas are the people that are in, the elevators, or the people that help people. They know everything and they know everyone. So never discount anyone that works for any team, because not only can they not help you in your career, but I think there's a lot of joy into treating everyone really well and being a good person that way. And I think you build a lot of great culture and build that excitement around hockey and around the game that's going on. I will say as well, and especially in tech, sometimes ageism is a thing. You kind of look down on people in terms of oh, you have to be a 21-year-old, dropout from Harvard to create a business. And that's not true at all. A lot of the data says that people in their 40s are kind of the sweet spot for starting tech companies now. And there's people as young as in their 20s, and there's people as old as in their 70s, 80s, 90s. There's really no limit in terms of what you can learn from people. And in many cases, I've actually found that the older men are far more interested in what I'm doing and how that fits into their job, especially if I can help them be better. So I would say never discount anyone based on anything, because you never know who will help you or who's interested in what you're doing. I will also, because this is the Kitchener Rangers, give a huge shout out to the Kitchener-Waterloo region. Without that region, I would not be the entrepreneur I am. I would not have the tech company that we do. They are just ginormous resource. Lazaritis, Creative Destruction Lab, and also Waterloo as a university. Some of the best engineers in the world. I think IBM was they were their top go-to universities for years running. So we definitely have to do the hard pitch that hockey is really cool and we work there, or we lose everyone to Apple and Tesla. But I will say, if you are from Kitchener, you have some of the best universities and resources in the world. There is literally no ceiling to what you can achieve. Doesn't matter. And especially as a woman, I think there's so many great opportunities to chase right now. And one of the engineers that we have from Waterloo is a woman that leads our group. So, we don't really talk about it publicly, but just so many great people, and definitely take advantage of the location that you're in. So that gets me to, of course, we all know this quote, but I think it's very important for the career-minded people to think, skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been. And what I mean by that is every time people call me and say they want to be in analytics, I'm like, that was like 10 years ago for me. And where we're going as a company in terms of like bigger data play, more, software heavy type insights, I think is where not only are we moving, but a lot of the market is as well. There's huge, gaps in terms of like sports science, what's happening now in blockchain, all these other applications of different technologies in the industry. So don't look backwards, especially if you want to start a company. You have to look like 2 to 5 years in advance, because that's how long it takes you to ramp and scale up, as well with skills. You can always learn things on the fly, especially if you're I'm sure there's many, many people in here that can learn anything that they're thrown at you. So make sure that you choose something, that you think will be relevant and interesting in a few years in advance, and really build up to that to pitch yourself. So it just gets me to like a very little interlude on a COVID project we did, but I think this is really important because one, my failed health science, wish I was a doctor, kind of combined with my hockey life. So I thought that was a really cool moment. As COVID broke, the Toronto Public Health was looking to put up some like PPE dashboards. And I will say that these infectious disease doctors and these epidemiologists, I think, are getting the credit that they should have always got, because they are literally going to save us from COVID and this pandemic. So we were just happy to be a very sliver of a help into an incredible group that's, still trying to help us get out of this. So a bit more to hockey. You're probably thinking, where's hockey going, or how can you collect data? And there's all sorts of software applications that we've built. And basically all of these, as you can see, mine different data points. So they're just trying to figure out what the movement is, where these players are, what they're doing, what the referees are doing. And then you're taking all this data and trying to make it into something that makes sense. So when you look at a play that's more continuous, let me see if I can get this to play. We'll jump to the next slide that's not playing, but you can see that then you can map out the different data points and make it look like a visualization. So the game that we watched could then be translated to this type of viz, which basically the bigger the dots, the better probability you scored, and it's where the passes are coming from. So it's really cool to start seeing like movement and understanding patterns. And I know some NHL players even this week, and I had to hear it on the NHL network of how unhappy they were with sometimes how they're discussed, their analytics are discussed with them. But I think it gets really interesting when you can conceptually look at your game from a different perspective. So this is taking it to a 2D plane, and you're able to see your movement and your shots. This is another one that I think Zach Cassian would be mad if he was here and we had to look at this, but it's basically Cassian with Mcdavid and Draisaitl in the blue, and then how he would be if he was with average people. So there's all sorts of ways you can display data to show different management decisions, line pairings, all sorts of unique ways to pull that apart. As well, if you're looking at how to score on a goalie, or looking at where your team's shooting or shooting from or at, we've created different applications where you can kind of almost see it in a VR world. I think this is Nylander, where he's shooting, where he's scoring from. You can see the actual angle, shot angle, and it starts to get more interesting too. We know the speeds and the speeds at which they travel up to the shot as well. Here's another animation too. This is actually Connor McDavid's skating pass. So it's where he gets the puck and then where he releases the puck. You can see that, I think this is from last year, regular season. So just a few games, but you can really see his travel time alone with the puck, which we all know he's, a great scorer, but he's also a great skater and is able to create a lot of time and space away from opponents. So it's, kind of interesting to watch that puck movement and show just how dominant a player truly is in hockey. And if he was in basketball and he could play the whole game, it may be a totally different story for the Edmonton Oilers. And please, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. I just want to make sure you're all still there and I'm still connected. As well, this is actually a women's hockey dashboard that we did. One of my, passions is to not only help women in business, but women in sports. I see a lot of women athletes have the exact same feedback as me, pushback, areas that they like, just sayings like, even for me, it's you should work in women's hockey, or, you're not at the level that you should be working in the NHL, or all sorts of different things in terms of, what you hear as a woman. So I feel like, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I feel that if I support others, not only do I hope the support comes back, but I also just think it's just better for the entire industry to have that type of like talk and that, out into the world, because I think if we don't support women athletes, we won't see women in business really thrive in that space either. So we have a couple questions. Do you ever look at goalie stats? Of course, yes. So goalies are really interesting because on the box score, they actually don't have that many stats. And, in many cases, just like a goalie save percentage isn't that telling. A lot of times they're seeing lower quality shots to have higher percentage of saves. One interesting stat from that is, it's really hard to score on a set goalie in the NHL. It's actually quite a bit easier in the OHL. So I think it's this year, Tampa Bay Lightning's goalie Vasilevsky, actually 95.5%. He'll stop shots when he's set. Or sorry, last year it was 95.5%. This year is 97%. So you basically have 3 out of 100 shots that you're going to score on him if he's set, which isn't that good. So you really have to get him moving to get any chance of scoring on him. So that's a cool way to look at goalie movement, and there's all sorts of other data we collect on goalies to make that better. How do I maintain a work-life balance with career and family while building your career? Yeah, I mean, balance is hard. I think that's something, I've heard a lot of women say there's no such thing as work-life balance. So I try to make my priorities and focus. I think especially as an entrepreneur, this may be a bit different if you work in a company, but as an entrepreneur, I can make my own schedule. So I usually have 1 day a week, I have a focused goal, and I have 5 goals for the week. And if I hit those 5 goals, it always rolls up to my bigger goals for 6 months, a year. So it's a lot about planning and about giving you the time and space to create environments to, keep up your relationships. The really interesting thing, and that's why I kind of alluded to traveling a lot in hockey and seeing a lot of the European style game, is they really believe in this balance. And essentially they take a lot of time off in the summer. I think it's Germany that takes 6 weeks off. And I really respect that, because I think in North America, and especially what we expected of women, we're kind of on the precipice of burnout at all times. And I don't think we have the energy to properly do our job. So I think you're actually respecting your company a lot more if you can be structured and gated about when you do take time off, and show employees and other people that it's totally okay, and you want them to be happy, healthy people that are engaged with the relationships, because they're actually far better for companies too. So it's much easier to say, it's a lot harder to do, but it's a lot about planning, in my opinion. So here's one visit I had to keep in because I think it's pretty relevant for for the OHL. This is just a junior comparison. It's really interesting to see, how things change or don't change when you move from a lower league to the NHL. You can see 12 games from Erie, and I actually tilted my camera down because I have an Erie jersey behind me, so I wanted to get that out of the frame. I'll have to get a Kitchener one at one point. And then you can see a very similar shot from the Edmonton Oilers with those goals being the green. So, he's translated pretty seamlessly from junior to the NHL. But then we look at a Jake Virtanen, and he was in Calgary, a lot more spray in terms of his shot selection. He had a goal from the blue line, but you may not want to see that because you won't get a goal from the blue line most likely in the NHL. So a lot different story when you look at different types of people. Did you ever have any apprehensions about returning to school for multiple degrees? No, I always worked in the summer or had internships and, I always had scholarships. So I was able to do it. And I think that just has to be, part of how you plan out your career and what's important in school. I would say, like I said, informal education is great too. So if you can have a job or even like volunteer, especially if you are interested in sports, get in an organization and see what they do and see if you like it. I think, that's as important as going back to school. But, even now I'm at the University of Toronto. So I have never left school. Actually, someone the other day asked me like what year I was in and I was flattered, but I also, I'm 7 years out of school and I went to university for 8 years, I guess. So I'm a lifelong learner. I love it. If I wasn't here, I'm sure I'd have a PhD and be teaching out of school. But I'm more than happy to do both. Here's an interesting visualization too for some people that may be Winnipeg Jets or Columbus fans. So we always get asked too about like shooting talent, and there's a few standouts. There's a lot of average shooters in the NHL. One big standout is Alex Ovechkin. Another standout is Patrick Laine, and there he is to the left. So that's where he has to shoot from to get an expected shooting percentage of 6.3%. And the average shooter in the NHL has to get a lot closer to the net to have a very similar shooting percentage. So it's kind of cool when you can see that certain skill sets that people think are unquantifiable, you can actually mathematically not only understand them, but show them. Just seeing one about being an entrepreneur and the freedom it allows you to do what you want. If you were a larger part of an organization, do you still think you could be the social media influencer that you are? Well, I think there's two things. If you're a larger part of the organization, you have a very larger engine to power you. So depending upon where you end up on that side of the organization, you either have far more reach or far less reach. I would say it's not something I did because I really wanted to. I think people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm really quite an introvert, especially when you think about my background and what I like to do. But I see that, a lot of media is marketing is about getting your company out there. So I think it's just being thoughtful about what you see yourself as and where you want to land, and then how you want to, use social media to get there. So I would say have a balanced approach. There's been a lot of pushback onto what the expectations from women to what we expect men to do and post on social media. But I think if you're true to yourself and who you want to be, and you post content that is engaging, I think that just helps your career as well. So it definitely can be used, I think, for a lot more visibility. So I have a few more questions popping up, but I'll get into this big data cup first because I think you'll find that really interesting. So going back to my, gender parity, having a kind of a balanced approach of who I support. I really wanted to do actually 100% women's hockey. It didn't really work out. So I actually was able to put in a bunch of scouting data from an OHL team. So that was really awesome. But I was shocked at the submissions. So in just a month, we got 70 submissions and over 30 were in women's hockey. CBC Olympic data, which I was paid to do. So that was really awesome. They paid me both for the men's and the women's. So it was just such a watershed moment for me. And I was really pleased that they, put their money and resources into it. And as well, the NWHL full tournament, which will be finishing on NBC. So I'll be a part of that in a few weeks. I'm really excited about it. But you can see when you do crowdsourcing. So my thing for women's hockey is it's hard to get the resources and the attention for it. But if you put data out in the public, awesome, people will work with it. So people that have won the Big Data Bowl and like the NFL and NBA analysts were able to get their hands on NWHL women's data and do all sorts of awesome visualizations. And like I said, almost half of them were based on women's data. So I think that goes a long way into understanding if we make women's sports more accessible, people will engage. So that's sort of my call to action to people, to stop looking at it as marketing, stop looking at for women as inspiration, and start actually paying them. And here's something interesting too. So on the left, you can see data and video. So this is actually sorted by expected goals. It took me about 2 clicks to do, 2 seconds. We can watch, I just put together 5 of the goals, and very similar. We can look at expected goals in a visualization. So exact same outcome in terms of what's going on, but different way to perceive it. And I think it totally depends on the person you are, the player you are, the fan you are. But I would say that probably on the right-hand side will pick up more and more steam. So I have another question about someone looking to start their own business. How do you get over the financial hurdles? Finances are always hard. Capital is always hard. And we actually get into this in this slide. So female-owned businesses are actually 38% of all businesses. When women are getting funded, we're actually at 2%. We were at 3% a year or two ago. We actually went down during the pandemic. Black women are at 0.6% of funding. Huge, huge, huge issue. So for funding, look for organizations that support women in terms of like doing incubators or pitches. I think the DMZ is doing one right now. Like I said, Communitech, there's all sorts of great ones in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. Fierce Founders is another one. So, they'll have like non-dilutive grant money, as well governments match money as you scale and grow too. So there's a lot of sources of funding. Honestly, Canada is one of the best places to be an entrepreneur, but you also have to put in like the time and effort to get into those incubators, to write your pitches, to assemble a team. So there's a ton of steps, and funding obviously is one of the key ones. But I would say if you get everything else together, the funding one will come, because people are looking for good ideas, especially now when the economy is, uncertain. If you have an idea, it's a great time to start. So getting back to the funding, like, why does it matter? Why does it matter that only 2% go to women? And why does this not stop with just funding? Well, the problem is when male-led companies raise funding, they spend at least half of it on marketing and PR. They hire PR firms. They petition these like companies. They do things for free all the time. They do things to undercut women 24/7. They actually pay for articles. So a lot of times I'll see like male-led companies that I compete against literally having sponsored articles that say how good they are and how much they're doing, when really it's just paid for. So it's this whole snowball effect that if we don't acknowledge that women are behind to begin with and fall even more behind when they can't deploy that capital, then we're not really giving women a fair shot at anything. And so getting to the prevention versus promotion, this is a diversion from hockey, but I think it's really important for hockey because this actually happens to me more in hockey than in tech, which is really funny. But we talk about like promotion being questions to people that are very positive in nature, and prevention being questions that are very, hesitant or like negative, or just like questioning that person. So unsurprisingly, men get 67% of promotion questions. Women get 66% of prevention questions. This is a Harvard Business Review study. So as I was saying, it could be like market. Do you think that your target market is a growing one? So how are you going to grow in hockey? Whereas prevention is it a defensible business wherein other people can't come into the space to take share? Or why are you in such a small sport? How are you going to grow? I get that all the time. Why are you in hockey? It's, you should be in soccer, right? And the scariest part about this is, and I get this all the time too, from women, is that, people think that the putting capital in women's hands or VCs to then give to other women is a good idea. Women do it the same to women. It's almost the same percentage. We treat each other that badly. And the problem in hockey is there's very few women who have the power to hire, right? Capital to support, network to reach. They're looking for favors from men typically. And so they're unable to pay women to support them. But the great news is if entrepreneurs, or I think if women in hockey change how they respond to prevention questions, so they change it to a promotion, well, actually hockey is a really big market, a growing market where I believe that there's lots of potential. So if you can change, or, when I talk to someone about like, doesn't like data and analytics, well, does he like consuming it through video? Can we show him different, movement patterns? What's important to him? Getting away from that prevention aspect or that negative aspect and really learning to repurpose questions as promotion answers. And you can see they went on to raise 7.9 million in funding on average if they could do that. So it's a great study. I think it's a great lesson. And I hope that helps some people, both men and women as well, think about how they ask questions of women in hockey. So my final thoughts, and then we'll jump into a few more of your questions. I like this one, and this is obviously from a male perspective, but I think it's very relevant to, women in sports. And it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man or the woman who is actually in the arena, the hockey arena, right? And who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails well, daring greatly, so that his place, her place, shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know victory nor defeat. So I will let SJ jump back in if we want to do some Q&A. But I hope that was a bit inspirational, and I hope everyone took a little bit away from that.
Thank you, Megan, for giving us, a really in-depth look at your career and all the great work that you do, and just really offering some fantastic advice. As an employee of the OHL, I can definitely appreciate the old Connor Mcdavid stats. So
had to throw that in.
Had to throw that in.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to commend you for sharing what didn't work for you. I think that's something that gets overlooked really easily. And we failed at things, what we failed at, and I think you're going to help a lot of people with that, because it's come up in previous panels that working in sports is seen as the dream job, but it isn't always necessarily the dream plan from the get-go. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Also, the concept of ageism, I thought was really interesting too, and how it relates particularly to analytics, which, is sometimes seen as this modern new take on the game that disrupts the old ways, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing is you realize that people that want to win and get better stay in the game because they want to be relevant, right? They're looking to anything to help them. So I think if you can align value and what you're doing with someone's like outcome, their actual issue, I don't think you get a lot of no's, right? There's no pushback in like, how can I help you? Or here's how I help you. So I think as women too, if we can find those spaces to really push some of those areas ahead, I think we can go really far in them.
Yeah, totally. I have a question. I'm personally interested. You get to work with a variety of clients and a lot of like high profile athletes at the highest level of the sport, and you get to deliver a very interesting, like unique angle of the game that really isn't readily available. You provide a very specific story. I'm just interested in how rewarding of an experience that is to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really rewarding. And I think the really interesting thing that the public doesn't understand as much is the people that are the best at the game doesn't matter any level, they typically want to be better, right? So they're so driven. So it's not always the phone calls you think. It's like some of the best players in the world that are like, how can I, be like a legend, right? That's their goal. So I think they're really receptive, and I think seeing their game improve just season is really rewarding, both for them and player development and everyone else that works in that system. It's not just like one person, right? It's just a whole crew. Especially when you get to the NHL, you see how much goes on and how people can get lost or whatever, and it's trying to get the best out of everyone. And I think analytics and data is like a huge part of that puzzle that underlines a lot of departments.
Definitely. And I mean, hopefully we're moving towards a space where, it's even more, eventually more readily available. And I guess even more accepted, if accepted is the right word here.
It's fair.
Which, and just to kind of to lead into one of the questions here, I've been working towards becoming a hockey journalist and want to use statistic and analytics to show fans what teams look at game to game. Do you think there's more room in hockey media to use more complex statistics and analytics? I mean, I think hockey media has adopted it in some aspects. You see it on the broadcasts, but are we moving towards a space where it's going to be used even more?
I think so, but I think in different ways. Like I was saying, I think visuals is a huge way to communicate very quickly complex ideas or complex mathematics. So I think if you can simplify the complexities of some of these analytical models, I think that's really valuable, and write about them succinctly to actually like connect the dots for people. I also think that, if you are really interested in how to push things forward, look to other sports. It's like literally what I always do. I probably talk to like one different sport a day. Like that's how in tune I am to what are you doing in Europe in soccer? What are you doing in the MLB? I'm even doing an NBA technology conference for them at the end of this month. So, there's really cool stuff happening in other sports that I think if you're just siloed in hockey and you don't look outward, you will miss it, right? So just be really open to other spaces too. Like what's happening in med tech right now, like in healthcare. Some of that is getting a ton of money. So, take inspiration from the fast moving sectors.
Yeah, I think that's definitely great advice. I mean, considering analytics are used much more in a lot of other sports, right? I mean, baseball is the obvious one that comes to mind. So I guess I can imagine there's just so much to be learned by speaking to other people and just seeing what works, what doesn't, and where there's room for the analytical side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Meghan, once again, I'd like to thank you for giving us that really, really in-depth look at all the fantastic work you do in your career path and offering some really helpful advice. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks to everyone at Kitchener. I mean, this is amazing. Joe Birch, of course, David Branch at the OHL. So many great people, so many great men. I'm just so happy to be included. So thank you, SJ.
Yeah, I'll let Dave know.
Perfect.
All right. Well, as always, we'll take a quick break and then we'll return with our third panel and the final leg of the event. So we'll see you in a bit.